This is the Cachtice castle. It was built in the 1200s, but the reason it is so popular today is its most famous resident, Elizabeth Bathory. She did a lot of horrible things in the 1600s. This was her main residence when she kind of became an adult. This is where she did all of her horrible things, and this is also where she died. Let's go check it out. Definitely doing some work on it. It's nice to see that the money that you spend in these type of places for the admission fee is actually being put to good use. What are we doing? Dva? Děkuji. So here at the Cachtice castle, this is the scene and the home of a ton of murders, one, and two, one of the most famous serial murderers in history. There's a lot more serial murderers in, modern era, modern times, but very few of the historical ones are still with us today. Her reign was in the early 1600s, and people still know about this. People still come to see this castle. As of now, the castle sits empty and mostly ruined, but this is the site of one of the most grisly things conducted by a single person in history. In 1611, the Bathory family was one of the most powerful families in the Hungarian Empire at the time, which spanned a lot of what is modern-day Czech Republic, Poland, Romania, and Slovakia. Elizabeth Bathory was accused of killing and mutilating over 600 young women within the walls of this castle. Over time, the story began to take on, supernatural hues to it, sexual hues to it, sort of making Elizabeth Bathory out to be some sort of vampire lesbian or something like that. But the reality was brutal enough without all the other embellishments, without the supernatural aspect, without the sexual assault aspect. But as it sits now, the myths are so entwined to the actual story that actually determining what the truth was is probably impossible. But either way, they say truth is stranger than fiction, and this is a place where truth really is probably about as strange as the fiction. One of the stories, because Elizabeth Bathory did have accomplices. This isn't something that, she just did on her own and was able to do all of this on her own. I mean, that's a lot of effort to put in. I know I personally don't have time to lead a normal life and, pretend or I guess she didn't have to pretend, but I didn't have time to do all the royalty things as well as murder 600 people. So she definitely had accomplices. And one of the stories is that one of her accomplices was a local witch, which, whether or not you believe witches existed, I could see it. I mean, it's a pretty grisly thing to do. So with the help of a local witch to help you maintain your youth and procuring sort of reagents for your spells via murdering people, kind of makes sense, right? This is the site of the Western Palace. This was probably her main, I don't know if this was the living quarters. This might have been a gathering room where they had feasts and things like that. So Elizabeth was, this was back in the feudal Europe days, the whatever you want to call it days. And it's not like you found a man that you wanted to marry, you found a woman that you liked, and you guys sort of did that thing. No, this was back in the time when, at least with nobility, arranged marriages were the standard. That was the routine. So at the age of 14, Elizabeth Bathory was married off to a very powerful man, and on the marriage day, the Cachtice castle that we're in now, that was part of her wedding gift. Not only this castle, but I believe 17 of the surrounding villages. That's Vishnove down there. And Elizabeth Bathory had always had these rumors that she was a little off, a little bizarre. Obviously punishing servants and things like that. I'm sure the nobles felt they had to do it, but Elizabeth Bathory's, routine punishments were a little extra brutal. They were a little worse than what is considered normal of the time period. But her husband sort of kept a bit of that craziness in check. Elizabeth Bathory, she would go and she would, stay at some of her other residences. They had a bunch of different castles, and she would, pretend, do all the traditional noble things. But when her husband died, she went nuts. She snapped. And when she snapped, she moved to Cachtice Castle full time. And in those, 17 villages that she kind of got also along with the castle, which, let's take a look. I don't know if the GoPro will pick some up. There's one way back there, Vishnove down there. There's one in that little valley. Obviously the village of Cachtice. So Elizabeth Bathory would send her assistants it was 2 women and 1 man. One of the women was rumored to be a witch, as we talked about earlier. So they went down into the village, or the villages, and they started, trying to hire young women to work at the castle. Part of working at the castle would be, they would learn how to be ladylike, that sort of thing, and they would never come back. And people started to eventually ask questions. There started to be a little bit of a reputation. Obviously, when the peasant class is asking questions about, the nobility, well, the nobility is just going to tell them to piss off. So they didn't really get any justice. The peasant class never got any justice. And however, there was a reputation that had sort of developed, myth or so that started to develop, where people were like, hey, we sent our daughters up there, but they never came back, and they're not there anymore. So eventually the peasantry just said, hey, thanks for the offer to go work at your vampire murder castle, but we're not doing it. We're not going to send our daughters there anymore. And so her supply of the torture victims, or if you believe the legend, that her supply of fresh blood dried up. So her next step was a good idea for the short term, but it also was what led to her downfall. She opened what she referred to, or I guess at the time was referred to as a gynecium, which essentially is a girls' school, but for, wealthy, well-connected women from good families. And the thought process was, I am a, very well-respected, very noble Hungarian countess. I'm a widow now, so I don't have a whole lot of time for other things, and, I can't remarry because that was the way things went back then. So she opened up this gynecium for young noble girls. Well, her plan really was just a ruse to get young girls back to the castle so she could torture them and kill them. Well, this time, people were starting to wonder, hey, we sent our daughter to you like a year ago, and we haven't heard from her. And then they found out with other people, because they're all nobles, they all talk, we've sent a lot of girls here, and we haven't heard back from any of them. We don't know where they are. So just like the peasants, how they started to get wise to, we're not going to do this anymore. We're no longer sending you our daughters because we don't know what you're doing there. which was the same exact complaint the peasants had. But this time, it was nobles making the complaint. And the nobles could get justice. The nobles weren't going to sit back and just be told off like the peasants, were forced to do. So eventually they sent a sort of an investigator up to the castle. And according to the legends, when the investigator got here, he walked in on a torture session of a noble girl. And that was it. Jig was up. She was done for. So after that was found out, obviously everything was downhill for Elizabeth from that point. So what happened then was there obviously a huge amount of knights and things like that came up here. And Elizabeth was walled in to the castle walls. They essentially just turned a wall into a prison. And there was a little tiny slot that she could be fed through and get water through and stuff like that. But she wasn't allowed to go anywhere because she's literally walled in. And she got walled up. And then after that, the trial began for her collaborators. Well, the male collaborator got it the best. He got a simple beheading, followed by being thrown into a pit. The female collaborators, who were accused of being witches, obviously, they were beaten and thrown. It's debated whether they were thrown into a fiery pit or whether they were burned at the stake. Either way, not pleasant. And that went on. People never really got the justice because even to this day, a lot of people don't know where the bodies are buried. So Elizabeth Bathory remained walled up in her castle for 4 years until one day the guards came through to give her some food and she had died. So they broke down the wall, pulled her body out, and buried her in the local cemetery. Now, you're not going to be surprised by this at all. The locals were pissed. We're not going to let you bury this woman who killed an untold number of our daughters in our cemetery? Hell no. We're not having it. So they exhumed Elizabeth Bathory and then took her back to Hungarian lands where she was buried in her family cemetery. So whether or not you believe the stories, all the extra embellishments that she was a lesbian vampire or that she bathed in the blood, that's up to you. That's your call. I like a good story. But even if you don't believe the stories, what she still did, even just the torture and murder, is insane. So you don't even have to embellish this much of a story. Like, the story's already nuts enough. So that's the quick and dirty version of the history of Elizabeth Bathory. And that's it, guys. That's all I got for you on this one. This is me redoing the Cachtice castle. Hopefully the footage is a little bit better now that I'm actually narrating it, being here. Hopefully it makes it a little bit more of an enjoyable experience for you guys. Thank you so much for watching. I had a blast making this video. I'm so happy to be back here. And yeah, I'll see you guys next time.